else. 2 years ago, I was in the midst of researching my second book, so the nautical school ships, Vernon and Sabron. Just so you've got a good picture in your mind as we talk about this story, this is one of the nautical school ships. This is the Vernon. If you look really carefully, you'll notice that there are lots of children about your age standing up all over the ship. Some of them are really high up on the masts. They did this every recess time. The idea was that these boys would be at school during the day, and during recess they needed to get some blood pumping through their bodies, so they'd climb up to the very top of the ship. Maybe an idea for you one day. Recess is a bit different here. The nautical school ships are a really unusual institution, a 19th century institution. They were 2 ships. The Vernon was the first one. It was replaced later by the Sabron. They were basically floating boarding schools run by the state government. So what it meant was that lots of boys would be on these ships, a couple of hundred at a time. They would be at school during the day. This is what a normal school lesson looks like on the Sabron. Similar, different to what you're like at school. Maybe the moustaches are different. I'm sure that there are a few things that you can see in the pictures that are similar to what you do at school. The boys who were on these ships went to their normal school lessons each day. They also did a lot of sport and recreation. They were taken out on excursions. They were also taught something that's a bit different to what you do in school. They were taught a trade. And the idea was that they would learn a trade, so maybe carpentry, maybe shoemaking, maybe tailoring, maybe learning to be a sailor. And the idea was that these children would be pulled out of their families who were neglecting them. So a very particular kind of boy was chosen to be put on these ships. They were taken away from their family, and they were taught things that would help them in their later life. A lot of these boys were being neglected by their parents, or they'd been in jail just temporarily for some minor petty crimes. So by teaching them academic lessons, by teaching them a trade that they could then use for employment when they were adults, this generational cycle of poverty and neglect was sought to be broken. And for lots of boys, it worked out really well. These ships are of interest to me because I'm interested in what school was like in the 19th century. My interest stems from not just my role as a teacher, but my interest in child welfare. I was so obsessed by these ships 2 years ago that I'm standing in assembly in this school and I'm thinking, oh, daily muster on deck with the Vernon and Sabron children. I'm in my classrooms teaching things to some of you, and I'm thinking, ooh, interesting teachers on the Vernon and Sabron. What would they be doing in this situation? I'm standing in events like this, and I'm thinking, these girls aren't wearing cute sailor uniforms like these kids. It absolutely overtook me, it consumed me. And this is because my connection to these children is because of hundreds and hundreds of hours of research. Where is this research from, I hear you ask? Lots of archival research has gone into my research, into this book. So I'm talking old archives with pieces of paper that no one's looked at in a couple of hundred years almost. Old parliamentary papers that sound really boring but actually aren't. Archival letters from these boys, some of them in this photo, to the captains on the ship, telling them how much they're enjoying being on the ship, or, and this is the important bit, while they're out on apprenticeship. These boys were farmed out, sometimes literally, all over New South Wales. They were attached to a master or a mistress who taught them how to be a servant, how to be a farmhand, lots of different jobs. So this trade training that they were doing converted into a job. What I like to do in my research is form connections, authentic connections with these hundreds and in the end 4,000 children. What I like to do is sometimes find some interesting stories for my book. As a popular historian, I'm bound, I have to tell an authentic story of this institution. I can't just make up stuff. I can't slant things in one perspective just to make the story more interesting. But when I'm looking for individual boys' lives to biography in my book, sometimes I'm looking for a particular kind. Believe me, on this ship, there are lots and lots of troublemakers. Not all of them, but some of them are so bad that they make the newspaper. These are the children I'm really interested in because they can tell us a really fascinating story, sometimes of criminal behaviour. This is the boy I want to talk about. This is Jack Brown. This is his mugshot. Things are always bad when you're having a mugshot taken. And Jack Brown was in serious trouble one day. He came back from his apprenticeship, which was out in Ballina. He'd had an interesting time on this farm there, and he turned up one day at the house, and he killed the family who had been looking after him for several years. He knocked on the door one evening. The woman who had basically been his mother for the last few years answered it, and he shot her with a rifle. Her husband came running. He heard a gunshot. Jack Brown scalped him with a brush hook. Think blood everywhere. Then he went looking for the farmhand who he knew also lived on the property. He chased this man round the farm and eventually shot him too. He dragged all of the corpses and hid them around the farm and sat down with the rifle and waited for the family's 2 teenage children to come home. I found this story in a whole range of newspapers from the 19th century. They all have the same story over and over again. They have exactly the same details over and over again. The detail that really caught my eye is that he did all of these things in his sailor suit that he'd been wearing on the ship. Now, this is what the focus of my discussion today is. All of these newspaper articles had exactly the same details. My connection with this ship is really intense. And I started to think, this is so bad, I don't think I quite believe this. I think I might be in a 19th century echo chamber. An echo chamber is something that you would be familiar with even if you don't know that phrase. An echo chamber is a space where all of your ideas, maybe some of your beliefs and assumptions, are echoed or reflected back at you and you don't realise. An echo chamber doesn't challenge your ideas, it just repeats them for you so you feel pretty good. You don't really want to step out of an echo chamber because that's scary and dark. If you stay in the echo chamber, it's very comfortable. The echo chamber that you, as our youth audience, will be really familiar with is any internet search engine like Google, for instance. It learns your searches. Sometimes your browser might be tracking you through other websites you visit. Google is interested in what you click on. And after a while, your Google searches will start to reflect your ideas and assumptions and beliefs rather than challenge them. And it suddenly occurred to me that this story that I've been reading about with Jack Brown might not actually be true, even though it was reported by lots of newspapers in the 19th century media. So what do you do about this? I'm lucky because I have such an intense connection with these boys that I had a hint that I might already be stuck in one of these chambers. So I stepped out of it. What did I do to do that? I went back to the archives. I went looking for references to boys wearing these uniforms. And there are 2 things that I found in my notes, hundreds of thousands of words of notes. There's no way this crime could have been done while wearing one of these uniforms. And this is sort of the emotional point in this story, I think. Not all the killing, it's that he did it in his school uniform. There are two reasons why this strikes me as rubbish and I don't believe it. This is me getting out of the echo chamber. This ship was not really rich. They recycled these uniforms, these sailor uniforms. You left for apprenticeship, the next boy would wear your uniform. This was really well documented. The other thing is that whenever boys were taken out on apprenticeship, it was a big deal in the rules of the ship that your master or mistress had to bring clothes for you, down to the point that when they signed the form to take you, the form had your boot size, your hat size, and the size that you would need for pants and a shirt. The whole point of these apprenticeships was to help these children step out of the poverty that they'd been part of. The captains of these ships said, no, we're not going to have sailor uniforms out in Ballina. We want you to be wearing normal clothes so you're not earmarked immediately as one of these boys. So it was the first thing I'm thinking, maybe not wearing the sailor uniform. Then I went, sailor uniform? So cute. I like how they've got pot plants in their photos. That's nice. I went back to State Archives. I went through thousands of pages of the school's entrance books looking for Jack Brown. There's no Jack Brown in the entrance books. All of his aliases, and he had a lot, not there. I thought, I'm going to find this child. I set my parameters really wide, looking for boys who were his age roughly, had similar characteristics in terms of where he was born. He was not on the ship. I went to the last place I could possibly think of to find more information about this child. I went to the original court records. Now, these are so old and no one else has ever looked at them before. I had to peel them apart. I can just see someone 150 years ago putting these in a box thinking, no one's ever going to look at this. In came me. So I peeled them apart. In all of the witness testimony, all of the details from this child, everything written down, the teenage children who you'll be pleased to know survived, he was not a Sabron boy. The newspapers had it completely wrong. So Jack Brown, this was a made-up story by the newspaper. These people did die. He did kill Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe and Mr. Gillick. That happened. But he was not a Sabron boy. Now, this was a big lesson for me because it taught me, or underlined for me, taught me to not even trust 19th century newspapers because they're feeding off each other. They're using each other's information and creating that echo chamber. For you, this is also a lesson to learn. It means that to create an authentic connection to whatever topic that you are researching in school, or just when you've seen something on TV and you think, oh, I want to know more about that, and you get out your phone, you should definitely use a range of sources. Don't rely on a newspaper or even a couple of newspapers because, as we've seen, they were using each other's information and creating a lie, an inauthentic connection between themselves and this child. In my opinion, having a story like that doesn't have an authentic connection to reality is not a story worth telling. It's a story that's only based on gossip and hearsay, and that doesn't matter, particularly when you're writing history. Jack Brown would know because this photo was taken a couple of weeks before he was executed. Thank you.